Hi everyone, today Sarah and I will be presenting on protein and bone health for our second PowerPoint in our nutrition and healthy aging series.
Okay, and we're going to go over 3 objectives today. The first one is you're going to be able to explain why protein is important for muscle repair and bone health. Secondly, you're going to be able to list one non-dairy source of calcium as well as many dairy sources of calcium. And then you're also going to be able to identify 2 forms of weight-bearing exercises that you can do to improve your bone health.
In the first part of this PowerPoint, we will talk about protein.
So protein provides many functions in the body. First and foremost, it provides structure to the body. It's the main building block of muscle or that lean body mass. The more protein that you have, the better you're able to form and repair muscle, and so it increases motility in that respect. It also helps to maintain the acid and base balance in our body, as well as regulating our fluid balance. Another aspect of protein is that it transports enzymes and hormones throughout the body. So it acts as a carrier for different hormones to have different functions to occur during the body, such as absorption and that type of thing. Protein is also important, plays an important role in immune function and health. And as a last resort, it can provide energy. But generally we like to use carbohydrates and fat for energy before we're going to resort to protein. So that's kind of a last resort.
Older adults have decreased energy needs because their basal metabolic rates have decreased and they get less physical activity. They need more protein though to preserve muscle mass, which losing that is a normal part of aging. They also have increased protein and strength training preserves that muscle mass. Protein also helps maintain physical function and protein needs increase during infections and after surgeries, which can be more common in older adults. Older adults also lack variety in their protein sources, so it's important that they get protein from many different sources, and the recommendation is that they get 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day.
So how can you get more protein into your body? So these are some food sources of protein, which is the main way that we consume protein. So seafood is a very good option for protein, as well as it has a lot of other nutrients in it, such as omega-3 fatty acids that are very healthy for you. Poultry is another lean source of protein. In other words, it doesn't have a lot of the saturated or unhealthy fat. Lots of different meats are a good source of protein. They're pretty much meat in and of itself is entirely made up of protein and vitamins and minerals. Eggs are a complete source of protein in a sense that they have all of the essential amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein, in one egg. So if you eat an egg a day, that is a good way to get some of those essential amino acids. Dairy also has a good amount of protein in it, as well as calcium, and a lot of times it's fortified with vitamin D, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Nuts have some protein. Legumes such as peas or beans, and then also grains are a good source of protein in the diet.
Meat is high in protein. We can digest meats fairly easily because we have the necessary enzymes to digest the proteins, carbohydrates, and fats that are found in meat. Meat is a good source of vitamin B12, which we've told you is very important for older adults. Lean meats have a relatively low fat content, while red meats have more saturated fat, and we will get into this in another PowerPoint.
So what about vegetarians? Vegetarians, as you may know, are people who do not consume meat, or they abstain from, someone who is a vegan abstains from all animal products. So since meat and animal products is a good source of protein in the diet, vegetarians often have to think a little bit harder, a little bit more about how they can incorporate protein in their diet and make sure they're getting enough of those different essential amino acids that your body needs. So the way that we do this with vegetarians is we use something called complementary proteins. And that's where you combine 2 or 3 different foods to create a source of protein that has a wider variety of those amino acids. So if we combine, say like peanut butter and whole grain bread, peanut butter by itself or whole grain bread by itself may only have a certain number of amino acids, but when they're eaten together, they provide a more complete source of protein that can be a little bit closer to what a meat source would be. So vegetarians, as I mentioned, they have to practice this a lot, but if you are a vegetarian, do know that you may also need to take some supplements just because you're not getting those meat sources that have things like that vitamin B12 or the other vitamins and minerals and then that you would normally be getting if you were eating meat.
This is just a visual to help us understand complementary proteins. Essentially, when we combine one of the foods on the left with one of the foods on the right, or a whole grain, it becomes a complementary protein. For example, if we were to eat black beans and rice, that would be a complementary protein.
And then these are just some snack ideas that can get you started with incorporating more protein into your diet. And we're also going to have a handout that we'll be sending along with this video that you will have access to as well. So one of the recommendations is you can add beans to tacos and chili. So whenever you're like making any type of meat sauce, you can always add a can of beans to that. If you want to make sure they're low sodium, that would also be a good idea for heart health reasons. You can dip apple slices in nut butter. So instead of just eating an apple in the afternoon, to make that snack a little more protein rich, and you can add nut butter, such as peanut butter, to that. Greek yogurt is a type of yogurt that is higher in protein than regular yogurt. And so you can add that to things like smoothies or even just mix it with fruit and granola for a high protein snack. Hummus also has a significant portion of protein because it is made from chickpeas. So it can be used as a dip for vegetables or even pita chips and can be very filling. Scrambling eggs, as I mentioned before, eggs are that complete source of protein. So adding some cheese gives you some of that dairy in there that has an additional amount of protein in it. And then finally, grilled chicken is just an easy way to get some lean meats and protein into your diet. So you can add that to like a salad to mix it up a little bit so it's not just plain.
In the second part of our PowerPoint, we will talk about calcium and vitamin D. Older adults have increased calcium requirements. They need 1,200 milligrams per day. This is because bone loss is a part of aging, and calcium contributes to strong bones. Calcium is stored in the bones and teeth. 99% of the calcium that is in our bodies is stored in bones and teeth. The other 1% circulates in the blood. Calcium is removed from the bones and teeth when circulating blood calcium in the blood. When circulating blood calcium becomes low. So it's important to eat foods that are rich in calcium every day. Calcium deficiency can result in osteopenia, which is a precursor to osteoporosis. And osteoporosis can increase the risk of bone fractures in older adults. Calcium is also important for the function of our hearts, muscles, and nerves.
So it's important to spread your calcium intake throughout the day. So dairy, as Kennedy mentioned, is one of the biggest sources of calcium in the diet. And so we talked about earlier, that 1,200 milligrams requirement per day. And so that generally equates to about 3 cups of milk. But you don't want to just drink 3 cups of milk at one time because your body can actually only consume about 500 to 600 milligrams of calcium at a time. So what you want to do is you want to spread that intake throughout the day so that you're getting that maximum absorption as possible. You also want to avoid consuming excess alcohol or caffeine. A little bit of caffeine is going to be fine, but if you have too much, it can actually impair calcium absorption. If you do take a calcium supplement, or your doctor has recommended that you do, make sure that you take that with a meal to kind of maximize the effects of that supplement, and also to avoid other problems that can arise when you don't have food in your stomach with the supplement. Also, avoiding high sodium or salty foods can really help to decrease the amount of calcium that is excreted, and you want to avoid that as much as possible so you can retain that calcium. Medications that you may be taking can also interfere with calcium absorption, so it might be beneficial to talk to your doctor and see whether or not you need a calcium supplement, or just increasing your calcium by increasing your dairy is just a good idea in general.
So here are some different sources of calcium. Dairy products are a primary source of calcium. Other sources of calcium include orange juice, spinach, almonds, cooked greens, fortified cereal. And it's important that all of our calcium does not just come from dairy, and that we get a variety of calcium sources in our diet.
Okay, so you've probably been wondering what about milk? There's a lot of different types of milk on the market today, and it can kind of be confusing as to what kind of milk should I buy, what if I don't like a certain milk. And the main way that I boil this down from a nutrition standpoint is we look at what's in the milks. So obviously we have dairy milk that is high in protein. It's a natural source of calcium. 2% or non-fat is recommended, just so you're not getting so much of that saturated or unhealthy fat. And a lot of times you want to make sure that the vitamin D3 is added to the milk, because as you will see in a couple more slides, vitamin D and calcium go together. So you want to make sure that that vitamin D is added to your milk. And then there's soy milk. So this is what we would recommend for someone who is maybe vegetarian or vegan, or just otherwise doesn't want to consume dairy milk. This milk is high in protein from the soybeans. It has to be fortified with calcium, but it still is a good source of calcium. And as I said, it's recommended for the vegans. And then finally, I kind of lump all of the nut milks into one category. And these are not generally as good, just because they are lower in protein. And as we mentioned before, older adults have a harder time getting the amount of protein that they need. And so we want to use dairy as a protein source. And so consuming nut milks, while they may be good for flavor variations, they cannot compare to soy or dairy milk in the amount of protein. They also have to be fortified with calcium, and sometimes many of them are not. So it's important to read labels if you do choose to consume any type of nut milks. And it's also important to remember that nut milks are made with very few actual nuts in the milk. It's mostly just water and a couple nuts that actually make up the whole milk. So you may be spending more money on something that's not worth it as much.
This is a visual to compare many of the milks that we see at the grocery stores today. And what we're really looking at in this visual is the amount of protein in the milks. As you can see, cow's milk and soy milk has 8 grams of protein, compared to almond milk and coconut milk, which have 1 gram of protein and no protein. And so if your stomach can handle it, we definitely recommend buying cow's milk. But as Sarah said, soy milk is a good option for vegans or for people who have a lactose intolerance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk about lactose intolerance a little bit too. They also make milk that has been the lactase enzyme, which breaks down lactose, or which is the sugar in dairy, to some milks. So you can even consume, a lot of times lactose intolerance individuals can even consume dairy with that lactase enzyme that's been added. So lactose intolerance is, as the name suggests, people lack the enzymes to digest lactose, which is the primary sugar in dairy. A lot of times, individuals who are lactose intolerant can tolerate small amounts of lactose, such as the amount of lactose that is in yogurt or hard cheeses, and then even that lactose-free milk. It's important to remember that lactose intolerance is different from a dairy allergy. If you do have a dairy allergy, then obviously you have to avoid all types of dairy.
So vitamin D helps our bodies absorb calcium. This is important for strong bones. And as I said, again, calcium is important for decreasing the risk of bone fractures. Vitamin D is also known as the sunshine vitamin because the sun is a major source of vitamin D. The sun penetrates the skin, and the skin absorbs and synthesizes the sunlight and turns it into vitamin D. And it's important to know that the ability of the skin to synthesize this vitamin D is greatly reduced in older adults, and there are limited food sources that you can get vitamin D from.
Okay.
In the next part of the PowerPoint, we will talk about strengthening bones. Bone mass is made of collagen, and the more collagen that there is, the greater the bone mass density. After age 50, bone loss exceeds bone formation. Menopause actually accelerates bone loss as well. This is why we tell you that you need to increase your calcium, the protein, and the vitamin D in your diet. Weight-bearing exercises are also good for preventing bone loss. During these exercises, tension is applied to the bones, and this stimulates bones to produce more bone tissue. And bone density is measured with a DEXA scan, and this is essentially an x-ray of the bones that shows how much is there.
So osteoporosis, you may have heard it referred to as brittle bones. And basically what that means is that you have a depleted calcium stored in your bones. Your body, like I said, that protein helps to maintain that acid-base balance. So if your blood doesn't have enough calcium, your body is actually going to take your calcium stores from your bones, and that's going to result in a decreased bone mass. And so that's why it's important to consume plenty of sources of dairy and calcium and vitamin D so that you can prevent that as much as possible. There will be a mild amount of bone density loss as a result of aging, but you want to help prevent that as much as possible with making sure that you're getting that protein, that calcium, and that vitamin D in your diet. When osteoporosis or that bone density loss becomes osteoporosis, that's when you see on the right side where there's a significant amount of bone mineral density loss, and that can increase one's risk for falling and maybe developing a fracture, such as a hip fracture in older adulthood. So some of the risk factors for osteoporosis include consuming that excess alcohol, low intakes of calcium, vitamin D, and as well as vitamin C, that loss of muscle mass, which again is one of those natural occurrences that happen throughout the aging process. Smoking also is detrimental to bone health, as well as rapid weight loss. And the reason I put rapid weight loss is studies have actually shown that our bones basically support our body. And so when we lose a lot of weight very rapidly, our bone mineral density is also going to go down very rapidly. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. And as you know, older adults are more likely to be at risk for malnutrition, which can result in a lot of weight loss. And so it's important to kind of prevent that with diet and nutrition as much as possible. Taking multiple medications can also increase your risk for osteoporosis, as well as not being very active. And then the final three on here are kind of a little more specific. Ethnicity relates to Caucasians. They have been found to be more at risk for developing osteoporosis, as well as females. So if you're female and Caucasians, this may be something that you want to think a little bit more about. And then finally, if you are a female, again, after menopause, your risk significantly increases. So it's important to make sure you're consuming all of those nutrients that we talked about so you can help to prevent this as much as possible.
So exercise is good for our bones, and the exercise recommendations are 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week. If you are doing a moderate exercise, you can talk but not sing. If you're doing vigorous exercise, you cannot say more than a few words without pausing for a breath. And this 150 minutes can be divided into 30 minutes, 5 days per week. And it is recommended that you do weight-bearing exercises 3 to 5 times a week, resistance training 2 to 3 times a week, and that you also incorporate balance exercises into your workouts. Some examples of weight-bearing exercises are intensive walking, gardening, tennis, stairs, hiking, weight training, heel raises, aerobics, yoga, dancing, knee push-ups, and wall push-ups. And we will be giving you a handout as part of this PowerPoint that shows a few more weight-bearing exercises and explains how to do them.
So if we were in an actual class setting, this would be the time where we would have an activity where you'd actually get to try out some of these weight-bearing exercises. So since we are just recording this video, we'll just go through and show you some of these. The first one is a side leg lift. So all of these can easily be done at home, at a table, at your desk, wherever you are. You basically place your 2 hands on the table or back of a chair, can be very easy, and just take your one leg out to the side and swing it up as the gal in the picture is doing. And that can be just an easy way to get your legs moving and get some movement into your day. The second one here is a bend and reach, and this is very good for your spinal health. So you go all the way down to the floor or as low as you can go, and then reach up as high as you can go, and repeat that several times for a good spinal exercise. And then the last one that we have on here is a chair lift. So this is meant to be in a seated position. You start in a seated position with a chair with armrest, and then you place your hands on the armrest and push yourself up using lifting up your full body weight. And again, we will have a handout with some of these and a couple more for you to kind of go off of.
To end our PowerPoint today, we are just providing you with another resource. This will be sent out as with our PowerPoint. And this is an activity planner that will help you plan how you're going to get your 150 minutes of exercise per week in. And so it's really cool. You can choose the different exercises that you're going to do, like biking or body weight exercises, and then it'll help you add the time that you're going to spend doing those exercises up till you reach 150 minutes. Thank you for being with us today and for listening to this PowerPoint. We look forward to next week's PowerPoint.